Well, hello everyone. This is Data Driven Formula One with Patrick Hansen, Ganna Pogrebna. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Ganna. Hello, all, and welcome to today's double feature. We speak about a medium team, which is quite interesting for us because normally what we do, we speak about the big names or we speak about the very small teams, but today we speak about a team which I always perceived as a team somewhere in the middle, Tyrrell, the Tyrrell Racing Organization. And as it fits here, I think it's a good episode to speak a little bit about Stefan Bellof, because as far as I remember, back from the time he was always considered as one of the biggest talents, and I remember even compared to Ayrton Senna. So I think it's a quite good combination.
Yeah, I have to say that before I saw this topic that Patrick picked, the only thing that I knew about Stefan Bellof was that he had a record in Nürburgring of the kind of the fastest lap. That's pretty much all I knew about it. I mean, obviously, Ken Tyrrell is more known to me, simply for the reasons that, he's from UK and kind of I know the UK a little bit better. And also, Ken Tyrrell is a guy who lived a very, very long life. He, I think, was born in 1920s and he passed away in, born in 1924 and he passed away in 2001. For that reason, many people in later years were calling him the dinosaur of Formula One. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it from the Formula One that he was called like this. And I mean, you already underlined it. His team had 465 entries, including one constructors championships and a 3 drivers championship, which is interesting too. More drivers championship than constructors championship.
Yeah, but that had a good reason, right? And the reason is called Jackie Stewart, I believe.
Right.
If I'm right, but maybe I'm wrong. Well, let's see.
Yeah, I think part because of course you have a great driver, but also as it was not unusual in that time, teams sometimes concentrated on one driver and the second was a paid driver, so then didn't get the same materials, and this would be another explanation, despite of course the obvious talent of Jackie Stewart. So he was coming from World War II, where he served in the Royal Air Force. So he was. I'm just thinking. I'm not sure if he was a pilot or just in the Air Force. So he began relatively late his driving career in the age of 28, where he began racing in a Cooper in Formula 3. So 28, where today, in the 2020s, you practically think about your retirement in Formula 1, to say it a little bit provokingly. And so he spent time in Formula 3 up to Formula 2, but he had, I think, to understand that he was an okay driver, but he didn't have the talent to end up in Formula 1, or maybe also because he didn't start it as young as you would need to start with karting to come to Formula 1. So he thought, I love the sport, but I will go to the management. So maybe some of the parallels he had with Enzo Ferrari, who also understood, I think, that he was an okay driver, but hadn't had the talent to drive at the top level as in Formula One, for example.
Yeah, so it also, like Patrick said, so he was in Royal Air Force, but then he also owned a very, very successful timber business. He was a timber merchant, and for that reason, he also had the nickname Chopper when he started racing. And I think part of the reason why he never actually kind of seriously did any driving is because he always had that timber business with his brother. I think it was two brothers.
Yeah.
And yeah, so he kind of always ran his this chopping the chopping business, and then in parallel he was trying to do this driving career, and then he decided that, oh, you know what, I don't actually have time for enough time for driving, and he started to work with professional drivers. But then well, like Patrick said, I mean, one of the things about this in previous episodes, you mentioned, Patrick, that you know, the main advantage of the smaller and medium teams is the talent spotting, and that's, I think, what his main contribution to Formula One was, right?
Yep. And just as you said, here are some of the famous examples of drivers who entered with Ken Tyrrell Formula One. Starting, of course, with Jackie Stewart, but also Jody Scheckter and John Surtees had the first opportunity to be in Formula One with Tyrrell, both becoming a Formula One championship, and also much later, not becoming champion, but of course becoming quite famous, was John Alesi, who also started with Tyrrell in Formula One.
Yeah, just to also to add to this, we probably need to say that because he was very kind of he was kind of all about operations, right, and making it like systematic, making it a process. So we need to mention that these people did not appear out of nowhere. So they organized what was called, I think, Cooper Formula Junior team.
Yeah.
And they ran it out of that wood workshop, the timber workshop that they had, the Tyrrell brothers timber workshop. So effectively, like, it was like a driving school for junior talent. And all these fantastic drivers that we see from the UK at some point would have touched this place. Yeah.
Exactly. This is important. Practically everywhere you do good results don't happen only thanks of great talent, but there's a lot of work and organization behind.
Yeah, so I just want to say that Jackie Stewart actually came from that junior team that they were running, and I think equally Jody Scheckter was also in that school.
Yep. And if you are interested in these drivers, from the first three, we already have out a special episode. John Alesi, maybe not yet, for the easy reason we started in 1950 and we now are somewhere in the middle of the 1980s. And Jean Alesi was much after the 80s. So that's the reason why we have episode about the first three and not about the last one. So if you're interested, check out in our channel if you are in YouTube.
Yeah, and this is also a cool part of that story, the Matra team that Patrick and I discussed when we discussed these tiny little teams. And so he had also managed to make a deal with Matra. So so basically he kind of was, again, like, being a process person. He kind of arranged this very improbable, in a sense, sort of agreement between the British and the French management and persuaded the French management that it would be good to have like the British sort of wing to the business. And yeah, as a result, he was in this Matra MS-10. And basically Matra team.
Yeah, and for this, from my perception, Tyrrell always stood out a little bit separated from the typical other British teams, and maybe something which we will discuss later to the problems they've been disqualified. And also, I assume when I think about Tyrrell, I always think of blue, which is the French color, and really even after he left Matra, as Tyrrell was a 100% British team, they most of the times had blue, and they had a blue sponsor, as I remember, for example, German Brown, as they worked together with, as a main sponsor, the Italian Candy. So for me, they always had been blue, which is normally the French color.
Yeah, and I just want to say, if you go back to our special about Jackie Stewart, I mean, Jackie Stewart raced for Matra team at the beginning, so yeah, so that's basically the sort of the beginnings of the success story for Jackie Stewart.
And other thing, Ken Tyrrell was practically married with the Ford engine. He discovered it quite early as a successful tool to enter Formula One, and he persuaded Matra also for a long time to not use an own engine, but drive with a Ford Cosworth engine. And maybe later, this had been a little bit a problem for Tyrrell, because instead of switching early, or at least at the same time as the others, to the turbo engine, he really stayed with the Ford engine up to 1987, where Tyrrell was practically the only team with the Ford engine against all the turbo. Okay, early years, the Matra years, Stewart first, 1968, became second, supported to become second in the Constructors' Championship. So for a new team, a fantastic result.
Yeah, so obviously Ken Tyrrell, he had a very and Jackie Stewart, right? So they had kind of almost immediate success in Formula One.
Yeah.
Kind of as soon as they entered, very quickly it took them basically like 4 years to reach at the championship, which was amazing.
Yep. But then at the end of the 60s, the first problems in the relationship, as I said, Ken Tyrrell was practically married with the Cosworth engine, but Matra insisted on their own V12. Also, of course, from a marketing point, because Matra had been acquired by Chrysler, which had been one of the big three companies here in the US. And of course, as part of the Chrysler company, you cannot use a Ford engine. Due to this, secretly, Ken Tyrrell was working on his personally plan B, having an own team, and he contacted Derek Gardner, who had been part of Ferguson research. He had known him because they already met together at some projects, and then later these two together would build the famous Tyrrell 001. And I think Ferguson Research, most of us never heard about this company, but they did history, even Formula One history, or because they developed the only four-wheel Formula One car, which we see here on the image for the case you see us on Spotify or on YouTube. And this in a time where we still had a front-engined car, so it was quite an interesting concept, but later stopped also due to regulations which says no four-wheel cars in Formula One.
Yeah, but we also discussed other innovations by Tyrrell, like six-wheeled. I mean, they also did that, so which was also very interesting, and they actually had some success later on. But yeah, so this was a very cool development, Tyrrell 001, and then it kind of went. I mean, yeah, the car was very interesting. So this is already 003.
03, yeah.
So, and if you see the sort of the reference towards kind of 007 eventually, right, from another British iconic character, or rather Scottish, right? So anyway, so but this 003 car was immensely successful, and Jackie Stewart won the championship in it, and I believe they also won the constructors championship in 1971. Yeah,
that's right. And also, as you can see on the photos, Ken Tyrrell was a person practically beloved by everybody in Formula One. So he was known as a very friendly person, later also called Uncle Ken. And this in opposite to many other characters which had been much more complicated. So it's another nice side of the Tyrrell team, that it was always a very friendly team right from the top.
Yeah, I just want to say that this is not to be confused with the Barbie movie, and I Am Ken has nothing to do with that. Yeah, apart from the name.
Yeah. And oh yeah, this reminds me the beginning of the 1970s was also the time of the high air inboxes, and which had been, I think, had been quite extreme on Tyrrell, as you can see it also here. And I think there's even one model with even higher air intake.
Yeah, I mean by the next year, I think by 1976, they developed the six-wheeler, right? There was this the famous the weird P34 that
exactly.
we have that we have shown before. But you know, still they managed to even win. So they were quite successful. I mean, considering how weird that design was, so that was quite successful.
It was quite successful, yeah. And the idea also quite attractive. There had been other teams experimenting with six wheels, Williams, even Ferrari, March. So it was a quite interesting idea. The big problem is the tire, because it needed the provider, in this case Goodyear, to develop additional tires just for Tyrrell. And this was the reason why the idea was given up by Tyrrell, because Goodyear said we cannot continue the development of the small tires. And this was the reason why Tyrrell switched back to the four-wheel car. So it was not that it was forbidden by regulations. It was forbidden, but much later. So in this case, the reason was a great idea, but due to Goodyear, they could not develop as needed the smaller tires. So this was the reason why it was given up.
Yeah, and also this was a relatively small operation, and the budgets were not big for this team, and effectively they really suffered from the fact that they couldn't because of those budgets they couldn't retain. So even though Ken Tyrrell had a very good eye for talent, he couldn't retain the talent because he would, for example, invite, I don't know, Michele Arboreto, for example, was one of the drivers, so Stefan Bellof, so he would like recruit these drivers, but he couldn't retain them. And as a result, as a result of this, all these budget issues, they simply could not afford turbo engines. So it's not like they didn't want to have it. Well, all other teams already had turbo engines, so this was the only car basically that didn't have. Well, they were stuck with the fact that they couldn't afford the turbo engine, so they had to innovate, and they innovated as much as they could with sometimes really interesting design that they engineered.
And I think this is a very interesting point because due to my perception, Tyrrell was a team which was quite okay, but then got lost in the midfield because for whatever reason they could not take the next step, maybe not get a big partnership with an engine manufacturer, not get the very big sponsorship like the other teams, Williams, McLaren, and so on, could get. And that's why, even if they always had great ideas, great talent to spot talent, for whatever reason, Tyrrell was a team which had been quite stuck in the midfield and then slowly went to the second half of the group.
Yeah, but I mean, there was very good reason for that. And the reason for that was the controversy that happened in 1984, as a result of which no, serious sponsor would actually go with them in 1985, right? And then that was the reason why they also struggled financially further down the line. So I think they were more or less okay until 1983.
Yes, exactly.
But then, obviously, we will talk about what happened with Stefan Bellof. But then in 1984, basically, there was a serious controversy that I'm guessing we're going to talk about a bit later.
We will, and of course, a little bit a problem when you are focusing 2 years on a six-wheeler. Maybe you lost 2 years development, 2 years experience developing a four-wheel car. So this a little bit a problem when they switched back in 1979 to the quite conventional model. And but as you see here on the photo, by the way, another famous name, Didier Pironi, who had been active for the Tyrrell team before he switched to Ferrari.
Yeah, but like we said, I think from starting from kind of the departure of Jackie Stewart, the team struggled financially, and so Ken Tyrrell effectively just spent his own money, and every year it was a big problem trying to attract a sponsor. And so here we have the sponsor, the Italian candy sponsor. Here on this particular in this particular year in 1979, but it's it was a constant struggle with the sponsorships.
So even if he had this entrepreneur background, for whatever reason, he didn't got it to get the real big deal as others.
Yeah, I think it's just the fact that he wasn't from. So I think it's the usual, right? So even though I think he was probably very good at striking deals and attracting sponsorships, but the fact that he himself was not from the mechanical background or not in car manufacturing. I think if he were in car manufacturing, like people would have trusted this better, but because it was always that timber business in addition to something else, I don't think that it's a very good combination for many companies, right? For example, like tobacco to go with timber, or any other, like if you had a business, let's just say you have like Benetton, like you have a fashion business, you wouldn't go necessarily with the timber company, right? It's just not a very good. I think it's just unfortunate that he wasn't himself in car building business, but he was in completely different business. And so when the sponsors were considering, okay, who are we partnering with for this particular car, it was always this timber thing, and it's not very sexy, attractive Formula One thing, right? So I think it was just about that.
Could be. So, and what you already discussed quite late in the game related turbo, and but so something what we discussed, and here you see the 1981 Tyrrell, and this time they got quite a big sponsor. Benetton entered, and so here they got, I think, a better deal. Benetton got the first experience how life in Formula One is, and this as they would then later use to acquire another team and rebrand it to Benetton.
Yeah, I was going to say that imagine even today, I think many companies would have had a problem going jointly with timber business because obviously we all want to be environmentally friendly, and chopping off trees is not quite what you want to be associated with. So yeah, again, quite a bold move from Benetton, considering how they have always been like ahead of time and thinking proactively green and pro-social and all that.
Right. And then we're coming to 1984, and this was the year where we had the big controversy, as unfortunately they had been disqualified later on.
Yeah, but for a good reason, because they broken the rules, right, effectively.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And
so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's quite interesting because Ken Tyrrell was always perceived as this nice, friendly uncle, but yes, clearly they deviated regulations, even if maybe less than originally assumed. And also, I mean, Tyrrell was a team which had a lot of times quite interesting technical approaches. Apart the circumstances that they maybe switched too late to turbo engine, but besides this, they had a lot of revolutionary ideas, like the six-wheeler, or also something different, which we will see later.
Yeah, so, but effectively, I think we need to mention what they've done. They basically were running underway cars until the pit stop, and then pit stops were adding like ballast. So it was like proper cheating thing, like now, And I appreciate what happened, because obviously they felt sort of excluded because they couldn't really afford the turbo engine, but they still wanted to compete. But at the same time, it was definitely not a fair game.
Yeah, it wasn't, and so they went. What they did is they went underweight in the race. race, and then shortly before the end, they would do a pit stop, and not for include fuel, but to get water to make the car heavier. This with the loophole saying that they have water temperatured brakes, and that's why they need water for the car. So officially not for the weight reason, but to cool down brakes.
Yeah,
And
so
yes.
that's exactly it. So and then, yeah.
Yeah, so this was in the gray area, which maybe still would have been okay, but the problem is what they found out is that it was not only water, but also it was mixed with some kind of fuel, and this was clearly overstepping the red line. So it was alleged that the water was in fact 27.5% aromatics and constituted as an additional fuel source. So this was the original allegation, which led to the decision to disqualify the team.
Yeah, so and then all this, so how they also made the car underweight, so they actually made holes in the bottom of the car. And, you know, that was a definite violation. I mean, there was a clear regulation of what the car should look like. And effectively, that was a big, you know, big problem.
Yeah. Exactly. So they lost all the points from that championship, and this is not only that you don't have points on the boards, but the problem is that each team gets money for participation based on the gained points, and with 0 points you are losing a lot of million of US dollar, which especially teams which already have a problem with the financing had been urgently have needed. Okay, so that was the big problem. They went originally against this decision, and then really they found out it was in fact less alcohol or fuel-like substances inside the water than originally said. Nevertheless, the decision still stayed, and you may say correctly, on the one hand, they cheated. On the other hand, it was also said, especially from the Tyrrell side, that they wanted to make a symbol against the company, and also maybe because in the past they sometimes decided against FISA and the other British teams. So you may also maybe they wanted to have the Cosworth engine out of the championship. So you may conclude, yes, they cheated, but maybe there had been also politics behind the decision, which wouldn't have been the first time, of course, in Formula One.
Well, I think a lot of Formula One sort of engineering is about, let's just say, inventively interpreting the regulations, right? Because I mean, we've seen that with several teams even recently, right? So it's basically how you manage to interpret the rules. But I mean, some of these things may have they probably could have gotten away with, but drilling holes, that's for sure not acceptable. And the ballast stuff, you know, like that's just not, you know, not a fair game. And yeah, like effectively they've been like financially really hurt, and the reputation also suffered, which as a result, none of the sponsors wanted to come on board for this car, for this team.
Or at least no bigger ones.
Yeah, and obviously because everyone now was on turbo, the turbo teams basically had now the majority and well, the overwhelming majority, and required the change in regulations. As a result of which, you know, everyone switched to turbo. And as we know, turbo is not the most safe way of doing things, even, well, back in the 80s for sure. And that resulted in some tragic events, like the tragic death of Stefan Bellof, who have never effectively driven in a, he didn't have time to train in a turbo car because he was always training in this kind of classical Tyrrell. And as a result, in 1985, he lost his life.
Yeah, but I think I wouldn't blame here the turbo engine. As you remember, because we analyzed this accident quite on detail in the episode about Jackie X, it was some kind of misunderstanding between Jackie X and Stefan Bellof. Stefan Bellof was on the fast lap while X was going relatively slow on the Spa circuit. But let's say anyway, but you already mentioned Stefan Bellof. We see him here on the photos. So
but what I was trying to say was that changing the car mid-season in 1985 doesn't help, you know, doesn't help performance. And if your driver is not familiar with the setup, so he would put himself in a lot more dangerous and risky situations, not knowing what he's dealing with at those speeds, right?
Exactly. And before we continue, already 2 recommendations. We always say, if you're more interested if you want to dig deeper, because this is just an episode of a podcast, try to get a good book. So here are 2 recommendations. The authorized biography, Ken Tyrrell, and there are also other options as Ken Tyrrell, Portrait of a Motor Racing Giant.
Yeah, so one book is Maurice Hamilton, and the other one is by Christopher Hilton.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely. I mean, the authorized biography is probably what everyone should have a look at. And then obviously just sort of to understand the controversy better. Yeah, the second book as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they are still in print. If not, sometimes you are lucky to find it secondhand in your favorite shops, or sometimes also on the big portals on the internet. And with this, we are making a short break. We will come back to Tyrrell, but we thought maybe a good opportunity to speak about Stefan Bellof, who only had 2 seasons in Formula One. The one where he was completely disqualified, not based on his own fault, but due to the technical circumstances we already discussed. And then 85, the same year where he had unfortunately the fatal accident. He was born November 20 in 1957 in Gießen, which was in West Germany, and only active in Formula One in Tyrrell, but more successful at that time he was in endurance racing. which was very strong in the 80s in Europe, and I think especially in Germany, as after the Mercedes accident, we don't had any big German teams in Formula One besides the small Zagspeed or ATS, and the big manufacturers focused on Group C endurance races, which have been real monsters and unfortunately very dangerous. And as far as I perceived it, more dangerous than Formula One. So there had been various fatal accidents, especially in 1958. And I mean, now from a German point of view, we lost two drivers, Stefan Bellof and Manfred Winkelhock. Winkelhock was at that time, I don't know, ATS or where he was driving, but he was also in Formula One. And I remember he was always identified as a highly talented driver, and at least in Germany, he was compared with the young Ayrton Senna. At that time, 84, 85, Ayrton Senna, please remember, was a high talent, but he was not a Formula One champion yet. Same as Senna, Bellof was very strong driving in the rain, what we also discussed many times in our earlier episodes. When it is raining, then normally you see a little bit more the talent, as it's the speed of the car itself is less important. So here in various races in 84 and also 85, Bellof could shine, especially in the rain Grand Prix.
And he was, yeah. So, and I guess at the start of it, at the start of his career, he was a member of that Walter Lechner's racing school that we discussed before. And yeah, so I think, yeah, a lot of, like I said before, so he's, I mean, at least the only thing that I knew kind of in detail about him is that he held a record in Nürburgring for the fastest lap for 34 years. So it took 35 years to beat that record, and it was very remarkable.
Yeah. So just one example, Bellof and similar, we know, for example, from Senna, started on the 21st position, which is assumed would be nearly the second to last position, or maybe they'd been three behind. But due to the rainy conditions, he could advance until the sixth positions, similar as we know, for example, from Ayrton Senna, and similar, which I remember also in the first year from Jean Alesi, as he was with Tyrrell.
And if for those of you who are not kind of not knowing a lot about racing, obviously we've discussed this many times. In the rain, all cars slow down, and then it's like the driver's ability that actually matters, which says a lot about Stefan Bellof's driving ability. So he was good as a driver, so the skill was definitely there.
Exactly, and I mean, practically up to today, Stefan Bellof is still remembered. I mean, especially for the drivers. If you are interested, there's a website about him, but really, he has been an inspiration for a lot of young driver. For example, Michael Schumacher mentioned him as his childhood racing idol. And we have other quotes here about him. For example, Sebastian Vettel, who says every German racing driver knows who Stefan Bellof was. And I think this is correct. Maybe the average racing fan does not remember him because it's now nearly 40 years ago. But I think the German drivers who start their career all have heard about his talent and have been some kind of inspiration for them. Another quote here: Bellof was a cross between Schumacher and Gilles Villeneuve. Jackie Stewart, three-time champion, said he's the greatest talent I ever met. He met him as he was Stewart was still, of course, aligned with the Tyrrell team. So there he met him. And the last quote: Stefan was the best of all drivers. He was a thoroughbred racer who could also get the last out of a rubbish car.
Yeah, I just also want to kind of say that so Bellof is actually the kind of the representative of this kind of new school of driving, because, like, you know, if we're talking about the 80s, because he first was in this Formula Junior, which I believe was at the time managed by Ford, right? So it was Formula Ford that he was competing as a part of this Walter Lechner school. Then he was in Formula 2, then in sports racing, and then he came to be in the Formula. So he kind of went through all the stages that we see currently, you know, the drivers, Formula 1 drivers are going through, like from karting all the way to, you know, like through different formulas to Formula 1. So it's kind of a very similar journey already for him back in the 80s, which is the journey that the majority of drivers now take. And it wasn't, at the time, it wasn't the mainstream, right? So you would just get, you know, you would be in some sort of competitive driving, but you wouldn't be going through necessarily all the stages to reach Formula 1.
No, and maybe the reason why he was that strong in endurance racing is because there wasn't much interest by German sponsors to sponsor Formula 1 drivers. So it was very difficult for German to get into Formula 1. So much easier also via Porsche to get in endurance racing. And if you shine here, you would have a small opportunity to come to Formula 1, but it wouldn't be the direct way as a British driver or a French driver would enter Formula 1. Something similar, which we saw later also with Michael Schumacher, who had been driving in endurance racing together with Heinz-Harald Frentzen, for example, before he got the opportunity to enter Formula 1. And so the deaths of Bellof and also later Winkelhock caused also a little bit a change, because after this Formula 1 teams wouldn't give the okay for their drivers to drive, for example, in endurance racing, because as mentioned, I think at that time at least it was much more dangerous than Formula 1 itself. And
Yes.
with this,
Yeah, and so this kind of led to all these issues with financing as a result of, you know, the 1984 and 1985. And so they've been really struggling financially throughout the later 80s and early 90s.
Exactly, and with this interlude, we are now exactly what you said. We are in the 90s. If you see the image, the photo here, another invention by Tyrrell, the high nose, which have been later copied by nearly all other teams. But the ones who introduced it to Formula 1 had been the Tyrrell team.
Yeah, and so again, they had to innovate, and they actually reached a couple of second places with this design. So by that time, Ken Tyrrell kind of removed himself from the management. I think it was his son that was whose name I don't remember. I'm sorry, and who was managing the team. But yeah, I mean, they came up with this innovative design. So that's basically under management of his Ken Tyrrell's son that they did this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, besides all struggle, I mean, they always reached to find sponsors which are using blue, like Brown or also Epson. So they always stayed somehow with their color scheme. So this is as you see the photo here, this is also the car which supported John Alesi coming to the sport and also show his talent. Same as Bellof, especially with driving in the rain, but slowly but surely the team was dropping to the end, especially as the high nose was something which is was quite easy to copy, and so the small the decline continued until 1997 when Mika Salo could get the last point for the team.
Yeah, and that's basically that's what I meant when I was saying that the the management was passed on to Ken Tyrrell's son, Harvey Postlethwaite. So quite a mouthful of names, so which is why I don't remember it. But so like he was behind all this elevated nose innovations. But again, this is also a sign, that when you are kind of again not you don't have the financial resources to maybe build like a heavyweight like in a in metaphorically speaking heavyweight good car, you kind of try to do something really innovative, and then this sprinkles of genius can influence the entire sport.
Exactly. I mean, a great example for the ones who have Disney Plus is the documentary about Brown, which practically out of nowhere won the championship based on some creative design of the car, of identifying all the loopholes which you can legally use, and something which was not able to copy inside 1 year. So Braun and if you have Disney Plus, a high recommendation, this documentary.
Yeah, but that's exactly it. So this is just a way to innovatively interpret the regulation without breaking the rules. Yeah, but the important thing is not to break the rules. But that's why this Braun GP is often and then kind of loosely Mercedes team, and right? So they normally are counted as kind of the descendants of this Tyrrell team. But then in between we also had BAR, right? British American Racing, which we'll talk about.
More or less because Tyrrell was sold to Craig Pollack, who was building up the British American Racing team right at the time, but nevertheless, at the end, BAR used other factories, other sponsors. So you may say in that point, BAR is not a direct processor of Tyrrell, even if Ken Pollock bought the team. Even interesting here, old cars went to Minardi, and Minardi, for example, used the last designs to create their two-seaters.
Yeah, and why this is a British American Racing is because it was a tobacco company that was called British American Tobacco, who was the sponsor.
Yeah.
And again, we have here the big tobacco sponsor at the sort of leading the way for this team.
Yeah, and also relevant to mention, Harvey Postlethwaite moved at the end of '98 to Honda and was here developing a new project, bringing potentially Honda directly back to Formula One. They built a car together with Dallara. Unfortunately, Postlethwaite suffered a fatal heart attack at one of the testing in Barcelona, and also Honda canceled the project and went with providing engine, for example, to the mentioned bar team. We are nearly at the end. So here the statistics. Tyrrell had been in the sports for a long time, starting with 67 with the Matra team where he was responsible, and then starting with 1917 having his own team, great success, especially in the beginning. And after this, slowly the team lost importance, as we discussed in today's episode.
Yeah, and like just to sort of add about Harvey Postlethwaite, I think another cool thing about him, if I remember correctly, so he was educated at University of Birmingham, where I worked at one point, and so in the engineering department. And then he was in this other team, Walter Wolf, that we discussed separately. So there is even a separate special episode on that. And at the time, he also managed to work with Frank Williams. So there was Walter Wolf and Frank Williams in this Wolf-Williams racing team, where, you know, the young Harvey worked. So I think this is where it all kind of comes from, all this mechanical genius and innovation under very constrained conditions, which is kind of Frank Williams's, you know-how in a sense.
Yeah. So here I've the last look on the 90s, and you see also a little bit the decline. They, at least 1 year, they had the opportunity, Honda, then they had the private Ilmor engine. They even had the Yamaha engine. The Yamaha went to Tyrrell after the quite successful year with Zack Speed. From a German point, I mean, as Yamaha entered, you thought Japanese companies had been very strong end of 80s. I mean, in the market. So everybody thought Japanese company automatically would bring success, but unfortunately, this was not the case. And then,
and also, like, if we talk about later years, there is also the very famous thing about like, not only about the high nose, but also about this gull wing that they had. And,
right, the X-wing.
And at one point, so obviously it was questioned by the regulation, because like this, they were saying, okay, that's not structurally sound. And I think so this guy, so the Harley Postlethwaite, he had to like literally stand on it, and there is even footage of him doing that. So at the time when they, so it was like in early 90s when they came up with this.
I remember.
When with this design. So so there was kind of you know, like, despite the innovation, we always have quite a lot of controversy around, like, every time you change something for the for the race, and like everyone is watching very closely. But then, yeah, in fact, that worked out eventually for them, and they scored a few points with Mika Salo, and so that was probably the last successful run. But then ultimately, the financial problems took over.
Yes, and when you have financial problems, this also means you cannot attract drivers anymore. So you have to have drivers who are, which are known as paid drivers. So they're maybe not there only because of their talent, but mostly because of the millions which they can bring to the team.
So,
Okay.
yeah, and did he work also for Scuderia Ferrari at one point? I thought he did. Is that
Harvey
correct?
Passorit?
Yeah. In the 80s?
Could be. I mean, you're normally one who can live Google.
Okay,
I don't remember if he also did.
yeah, let me just see.
But
yeah, so he was considered like one of the best engine gearbox builders, and he was personally selected by Enzo Ferrari to kind of work on. Yeah, so he worked on some of the Ferrari designs. Yeah, so that's
so a great character. Maybe we should do an episode about him.
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, for today we're coming to the end. As we already discussed, as you mentioned, Bar acquired the team, Tyrrell team, officially, but nevertheless, they opt at the end for different factories, chassis builder and engine, and maybe one of the decisions which had not been the best for the bar team, as they, far as I remember, they had a lot of money coming from their sponsor, but maybe not wisely used all this money. From my outside perception, and maybe if you acquired already a team and then use different resources, a little bit questionable. Again, so a lot of the designs, the former cars and equipment had been acquired by Paul Stoddart, who later became owner of the Minardi team. And due to this, the Minardi two-seaters, which have been used for promotional events, for example, if you want to drive somebody in Formula One speed around a track, had been based on this late Tyrrell 026. And a fun fact, as we already mentioned, Ross Brawn and his success, for a short time, and you see this in the documentary, they discussed, they had not known what should be the name for the team. As explained here, it was not Ross Brawn who suggested to call it Brawn Racing, but the team members said, hey, we have the team, you're the leader, let's call it Brawn. But one of the other potential names, which at least for a short time had been mentioned, which could be used, had been Tyrrell. This also, of course, for marketing reasons, as we see today, for example, with electric car brands, always nice to have a brand which already known, so you buy the brand, buy the logo, even if the car company has no real relation to the original car company.
All
okay,
right. So
that's all for today.
Yeah, that was the episode on Tyrrell, and subsequently also on Stefan Bellof and Harley Postlethwaite, as it turned out. So thanks a lot for watching, and it was great to discuss, this kind of out of the box topics. As always, please sign up and leave some comments and put likes under the video, because that's kind of motivates us to do this more. We are present in video format in YouTube and Spotify, and in podcast version on the multitude of different platforms that Patrick manages. So thanks to him, it's all working. So that's great. Right.
Thanks. So
thanks a
hope
lot.
to see you the next time then.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and see you next time.
See you next time.